Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
So I've been seeing some reporting going around about Joe Rogan and comments that he's made recently about immigration and ICE, and how these ICE raids that we have been seeing in LA and other places is like not what voters voted for, and so that's his line, right? And Joe Rogan has throughout the years spoken with a fair bit of empathy towards immigrants, particularly like, you know, families and mothers bringing their children across the border, blah, blah, blah. He has expressed empathy in the past for that. Seemed like that empathy was gone, frankly. And then now, after having an extremely influential role in Trump winning in 2024, Joe's conscience is starting to creep back up on him. And I don't know. I don't think it should be overstated. I don't think Joe really cares about that. He says a lot of shit on his show, and I don't think any of it amounts to something that would cause him to really change course in terms of his politics, because what that would require is a lot of overhauling of many, many things that Joe has accepted to be true over the course of the last few years, since COVID and before that, that have begun to like pave the way for his politics to shift. And I mentioned this the last time I talked about Joe. Even in the cases where he has a still kind of a progressive perspective or isn't explicitly right-wing, he is accepting the premises and the underlying worldview that gives way to conservative beliefs. And that has been the effect of having the sheer amount of right-wing grifters that he's had on his platform over the last several years, is that even in the cases where Joe hasn't shifted to a more conservative or a less liberal perspective, he is sort of embracing a worldview that will inevitably give way to that. So even though he's saying, these ICE raids are terrible and this is not what anybody voted for, first of all, it's not even dawning on him that like, oh, we were tricked. This is like, wow, I can't believe they're doing that. And it's like, okay, well, you're dumb then. You missed something very important. That should have been right in front of your face. It was right in front of your face. And you had on your platform the people who were laundering these exact immigration operations under the guise of, you know, mass immigrant importations by the Biden administration. You bought all that shit hook, line, and sinker. So this is what you advocated for. So anyway, let me play a clip real quick of Joe Rogan talking about this immigration stuff. He mentioned it very, very briefly in his recent episode with Amjad Masad, who is a coder, CEO of some kind of coding company or platform. So, you know, a tech guy who also happens to be Palestinian in origin. So he has a background of his family actually having lived in Israel and then being kicked out. So they talk a little bit about that in this conversation. And that sort of informs this very brief perspective that they take on immigration, but it moves on from that very fast. And I don't know that much about this guy, but he seems to have a perspective that's pretty well aligned with the rest of the sort of tech sphere right now, which is anything from like, I don't know, conservative centrism to like full on alt-right fascism. So he's somewhere in that spectrum. This guy is not like a left-wing advocate. He just happens to have a Palestinian background, so that seems to inform his worldview a little bit. So I won't get too much into the rest of their conversation because this one part of it seemed to be the most relevant. And the other thing about it is that a lot of people are talking about, oh, is Joe changing his mind about immigration? But I think what's really informative is what he says just after the thing about immigration. So let's listen to this real quick.
There's two things that are insane. One is the targeting of migrant workers, not cartel members, not gang members, not drug dealers, just construction workers showing up in construction sites, raiding them, gardeners.
Yeah.
Like, really?
Or Palestinian students on college campuses. Or not, like there's a did you see this video of this Turkish students at Tufts University that wrote an essay, and then there's a video of like ICE agents, like, I don't know.
Is that the woman?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was her essay about? It was just critical of Israel, right?
Just critical of Israel. Yeah, I mean,
and that's enough to get you kicked out of the country.
I mean, there's a long history of anti-colonial activism in U.S. colleges, that led to South Africa changing and all of that, and I think this is a continuation of that.
I was watching this psychology student from I think he's from Colombia, but he has a page on Instagram. I wish I could remember his name because he's very good. He's a young guy, but he had a very important point, and it was essentially that fascism rises as the overcorrection response to communism, and that we essentially had this Marxist communism rise in first universities, and then it made its way into business, because these people left the university and then found their way into corporate America, and then they were essentially instituting those. And then the blowback to that, the pushback, is this fascism.
And that happened like last century?
No, well, they're talking about
now,
forever, historically. He's talking about like over time, whether it's Mao, whether it's Stalin. Like fascism is the response almost always to communism. And the people that are that's the guy, Anthony Rispo. That's it. Really, really smart guy and very interesting thing. Jamie, how'd you nail that quick? Good job, buddy.
You said those words right as I saw them.
Decades of training.
Yeah.
Communism, fascism.
Yeah, communism came first, fascism came in response. Now today's left tears down norms and destabilizes the country under the guise of progress. We're watching the conditions for another reaction build. History doesn't repeat, but it echoes.
Yeah, so they very briefly touch on immigration there. Rogan says that it is, unbelievable what ICE has been doing, and that they're doing these raids at Home Depot and stuff, and they're getting workers. And that's not what anybody voted for, but it is, though. And there's a large percentage of Trump's voters that are very happy with what they're seeing. The reality is, this is what you voted for. You just either are kind of like waffling about your beliefs now because now you're really seeing it happen and it's scaring you a little, or you just weren't aware of what you were voting for. You got tricked into thinking that you were voting for something other than what you actually voted for. And I can understand, for a Trump supporter, especially kind of like a tacit Trump supporter, somebody that's like not all gung-ho about it, I can understand that they're unwilling to admit that they got tricked, because to admit that you got tricked is to admit that you believed what Trump said. And I can understand why that is humiliating for people. I don't have very much empathy for that, because Trump has been on the world stage long enough for all of us to know everything that we need to know about him. If you've been surprised by anything that you've seen from Trump, that's your own fault for not being well informed enough and just paying enough attention to the things he does, the things he said. Everything he's done so far is exactly consistent with what he did the first time, except worse. And so, is a figure like Joe Rogan or others like Dave Smith or Tim Dillon, who very specifically advocated for this guy and his agenda, and they made apologies for every single aspect of his agenda. But now they're pretty quickly realizing that what he's doing does not match the rosy image that they might have created and presented to their followers of like what this guy's intentions are and what his administration's intentions would be. So they are starting to realize that publicly. Either they're realizing this is less tenable as a position than I thought, or they're realizing this looks a lot different than I thought it would, and morally that's troubling to me. However, it would require them to admit that they got tricked by the most obvious trickster in all of history, rather than the lie that they convinced themselves of, which was that they're just smart enough to see that the media made this guy out to be a trickster, but really he's the only one telling the truth. So once again, they just got duped by the same lie within a lie that Trump has been selling his entire career, certainly since he got into politics. So that's hard to admit that you got that wrong, especially when you've spent so much time castigating the left and anything liberal at large in broad sweeps. And so they've got nowhere to go. If they reject Trump, they've got nowhere to go. So for the most part, most of these guys are just going to jump onto the next thing that allows them to say that they support Trump. For sure. By and large, I doubt any of them are actually going to start opposing Trump, because none of them are going to actually be comfortable aligning with the left. And for the most part, the left doesn't want them. This thing that Joe says at the end about fascism happens as a response to communism. And first of all, he's kind of admitting that Trump is fascist, and that what we are seeing from Trump, from ICE, in this second Trump administration is in fact fascist. But he's also invoking this idea of communism and saying that communism comes first. So the reason we're seeing the rise of fascism in America is because communism was taking control of America, and so fascism happens as a reactionary response. Obviously, that's a perspective that is favorable to fascism. If you are not slow, like Joe Rogan is, you can recognize how that historical framing is done in such a way that it makes communism seem like the real boogeyman, but then fascism only happens as a response. So naturally, the only answer is to stop communism from ever happening, and that way fascism never happens. Except, well, communism never happened in America, ever, at any point. And even if you want to make the argument that communists became influential in America in a way that changed our culture, at no point did a communist structure at any level of government take place or take shape. And even our social structures, the way our society distributes welfare and the institutions that exist for that, are menial at best. They're not even matching the social democracies overseas that are not even close to communist. They just have a basic standard of living for their people. So nothing approaching communism has ever occurred in America, even if you believe that communist infiltrators have worked their way into society. Even if that's true, none of it led to anything. But what these people are saying is that they're pointing to gender stuff and anything involving equality or what they would call wokeness. To them, that's communism. And so fascism is the response to that, to wokeness. So, I mean, that's the reactionary fascist viewpoint right there. He can say, oh, this is fascism. I can recognize fascism when I see it. But it's only there because the communists were trying to steal America in the first place. So even as he's recognizing that what he's seeing is fascism and that he helped contribute to this, he's using communism as a scapegoat, so that he doesn't have to take responsibility for the fact that he bought into fascist lies. But anyway, this is the type of framing that comes from people like Jordan Peterson and this guy that Rogan was referencing in the first place, this dude Anthony Rispo, who apparently seems to be some kind of right-wing psychology, neuroscience grifter. Every video that I see of him is him aiming at the left and saying, this is why people are left-wing in this way. This is why people are so he's basically just a right-winger who justifies his positions using psychology and neuroscience. And again, same thing that we see in Rogan is the willingness to acknowledge fascism, but saying this only comes as a reaction to communism. And even just using that framing, once you've already acknowledged that we're seeing fascism and that's a bad thing, using that framing excuses so much. And so it's both a sign that Joe Rogan does recognize how bad things have gotten and how quickly, but also that he's willing, one way or the other, to ride with this movement because he is buying into the fascist lie that the communists provoked this fascist response. Anybody who says that communism had any kind of hold in America is lying to you, straight up lying to you. Anyway, Trump's big, beautiful bill passed in Congress, which means it's going to his desk to be signed. So this bill is all but officially passed, probably will be by today, which is July 4th. And this bill is very bad. It gives the Trump administration the green light on many of their priorities and provides them a lot of money to do it. Cuts money from places like Medicaid and Medicare, huge amounts of money that are going to have an enormous effect on our healthcare system. And it gives so much money to ICE, so much money, as well as to like military entities so that they can participate and help ICE, building detention centers, places like Alligator Alcatraz and other concentration camps like that. Also, people are saying that this is not only a setback when it comes to like climate friendly energy sources, but that this is going to lead to like an energy affordability crisis because of how much we are kneecapping ourselves when it comes to that type of energy. We're literally setting ourselves back with this bill. We're giving a tax cut to the rich, and we are setting ourselves back in terms of general standard of living and our competitiveness on the world stage. And so the conservative theory is you give money to the richest and the people who have the biggest companies, and you let them allocate as much of their own money as they can, and you don't get in their way. And that's ultimately where America's, fiscal power and momentum comes from. And yet, none of that money is being reinvested into America as a nation. So those people get richer and the poor get poorer. So the Trump administration has immediately turned around to make inequality worse. That's not going to click for many people for a long time. But that's all this is. And this is, again, exactly what Trump did the first time. First thing he did was he passed a big bill, cut taxes for the rich, and gutted many parts of the administrative state. And that's exactly what he's doing now. And, the first time, that was one of the only major things that he got done during his term. I don't know if that will be the case this time, because a big part of this bill was giving him as much flexibility and money to pursue his pet projects as he could possibly get. So particularly what I'm worried about here is the funding for ICE and how much money is going to go into detention centers. They are already building unabashed concentration camps. They're going to build more of these things in red states. And ICE having the amount of funding that it's getting, ICE is getting more funding than like a lot of militaries in the world because of this bill. So the crackdown on protesters is going to be intense. The raids are going to be intense. And already they're working on a shoestring budget at this point. And they are, like Joe Rogan said, going to Home Depot, rounding people up, going into schools, doing all kinds of creepy shit. So that's going to get worse. We're probably going to see a hyper militarization, probably going to go from like these masked guys wearing like flannel and stuff to more militarized soldiers pulling off these operations. And yeah, like I said, a crackdown on dissent and protesters. So that, not the least of which, is what we can expect, I think, in the immediate sense from this bill, because a lot of the cuts that are being made are set for the future. Obviously, they always do it for when the term ends so that the next Democratic or whoever's the next president owns the cuts. That's exactly what they did with the tax cuts the first time. I think the more immediate effects that we're going to see is the things that Trump does want to be funded in the government, like ICE, are going to get insane amounts of funding, and we are going to see that on the streets. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and if you really want to support, consider becoming a member. That's the best way to support this channel. I'm posting different kinds of stuff there, like podcasts that don't make it to the main channel, book reviews, movie reviews. I'm reading Catcher in the Rye right now. I'm probably going to review that on there. Also posting music early. I've got a couple EPs out that were available first for members only. Right now, there's a couple tracks on there. There's a freestyle by me and my buddies Wrecked and Psych. So if you want access to all that, different podcasts and other stuff, become a member. And if there's other kinds of content that you'd like to see for members only stuff, then let me know and we'll work some things out.